Holy Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر.
On behalf of Institute of Regional Studies, I, Amna Nisar Abbasi, and our team warmly welcome our distinguished speakers, Lieutenant General Retired Abdul QAYYUM, Professor MOHAMMAD REZA TAKHSHID, Professor SYED QANDIL ABBAS, and all the participants into our webinar on Jcpoa and International Multilateral Diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar is articulated on currently active agenda in the region, that is Jcpoa. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a European success story of effective multilateralism. All the stakeholders believe that nuclear enrichment risk could be addressed by diplomacy. The thought behind the activation of the plan directly relates to the will of Joe Biden's administration, opposite to the US administration led by Donald Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, today's focus is to ascertain the future of Jcpoa in the backdrop of US and European confidence to resolve the enrichment issue through multilateral diplomacy, and also discuss the options available to Iran in case of Jcpoa's failure. Now, I request Mr. Imran Sardar for the opening remarks. Mr. Imran Sardar is a senior research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies. He has published more than a dozen research papers on conflict transformation, India-Pakistan relations, and the human security issues from South Asian perspective. He has authored a book on conflict transformation between India and Pakistan. He regularly contributes in the national and international newspapers. With this, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Amna, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the President, IRS, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, I once again welcome all the participants, and special thanks to the distinguished speakers, Lieutenant General Retired Abdul QAYYUM, Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID, and Professor SYED QANDIL ABBAS. The Institute's slogan is Know Thy Neighbor. Since 1982, IRS is carrying out in-depth analysis of the regional developments taking place in India, Afghanistan, and Iran, purposely to better prepare ourselves to respond to any situation that is coming out time to time. Coming to the topic, today's discussion over the prospects of Iran nuclear deals is timely, as the European Union has accelerated its efforts to bring the United States back on the track. Back on the track means the agreement that reached on the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal. Since President Biden has also signaled to return to the JCPOA if Iran resumes the compliance. Tuesday meeting, 2 days back, I think, Tuesday's meeting between Iran and the diplomats from Russia, China, France, Britain, and Germany at Vienna was said to be a step in the right direction. Nevertheless, it was neither optimistic nor pessimistic, since there was no direct contact between the Washington and Iran. The situation on the ground, however, is the same as before, where United States return is conditioned with the Iran ending its uranium enrichment and Iran demanding that United States lift the sanction imposed by the Trump. It is worth mentioning here that Iran, after the Trump's unilateral withdrawal from the deal and the subsequent sanctions, had increased its enrichment reserves that was against the spirit of JCPOA. The overall situation also intensified the domestic criticism on both sides. Moreover, Iran is also going to the polls, the presidential poll in June. In the given situation, which I must say, the change of leadership will also affect the overall talks. In the given situation, the JCPO's role is not only critical but also challenging. Islamabad is keenly observing the developments. Since coming into power, Prime Minister Imran Khan, his focus is bringing the regionness into the region, where Pakistan's relation with Iran are critical. The deal will obviously ease Pakistan's bilateral engagement with Iran. In that context, this webinar is looking forward for a healthy debate to envision the prospects of Iran nuclear deal. With this, I thank you once again. Over to you, Amna.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, to discuss this recent interesting development, I will move to our first speaker, Lieutenant General Retired ABDUL QAYYUM. Lieutenant General Retired ABDUL QAYYUM is a retired 3-star General of Pakistan Army who has been chairman of Pakistan Ordnance Factory Board and Pakistan Steel Mills Board of Directors. Mr. QAYYUM was elected as a senator from March 2015 to March 2021. He holds a MSc degree from Quaid-e-Azam University and currently chairs the Committee on Defense Production. He is a war veteran of 1971 Indo-Pak War and has been member of faculty of National Defense College of Pakistan. He is renowned national defense analyst and an author of 5 books. Unfortunately, Mr. QAYYUM could not join us, but has sent his recorded point of view, which is going to be played.
Rahim. Amna, you've selected a very good topic, and in essence what you're asking is if giant comprehensive plan of action is not revived, then is there a danger of a unilateral action by the United States of America, and how will that be for the entire world? I think it's a very genuine concern. And this unilateralism has really brought in miseries for the world. Because after the First World War, in which about 17 million people laid their life, and that included about 100,000 Americans also who died, then it was realized that we should have a United Nations. And you know that even before United Nations, when the Second World War took place, again, many million people died. And United States of America taking a unilateral action. They thought that the Germans will be living in unilateralism and they want to expand their domain. So to counter that, they started developing nuclear weapons, the Americans. And in 1939, they started. And in 1945, July, they did first experiment in Mexico. And thereafter, just in 3 weeks' time, they attacked Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and in Hiroshima, 130,000 people laid their life. And in Nagasaki, 75,000 dead and 74,000 wounded. This was all unilateralism. So therefore, it was decided that United Nations should be raised and there should be an institution. The very fact that there was an idea of United Nations that spoke volumes about the fact that the world believed in multilateralism. And because they thought that that could save the world and there would be peace. Now, this is because of the multilateralism that the United Nations is there. It is because of the multilateralism that you have World Bank, IMF, GATT, and all that. These are the examples of that. But unfortunately, after United Nations came into being, again, and when the Cold War finished, unilateralism again came in. And you saw that, and we all understand that unilateralism is that you don't bother for the international law, you don't bother for the international institutions, and you do what you want to do. and you do with impunity. So that is what United States of America did. They went into Afghanistan and then Iraq, and what happened in Syria and Libya and so on. This is all examples of unilateralism, and that they were heading for Iran also. But then I think the good sense prevailed, and President Obama had that vision, and they had this giant comprehensive plan of action. In that, they curtailed the endeavors being made by Iranians to develop a nuclear bomb. And the Iranians agreed. And in this, it was not United States of America alone. And you know it, that it was P5+1. That meant America, Britain, France, Russia, China, plus one was Germans. And in addition to that was European Union. So they all agreed. And that was multilateralism. But then with one stroke of pen, President Trump really just slashed it off. Now, again, the danger came up because in that the Iranians had agreed that they will cut down their uranium enrichment. They said that their processing of heavy water plants will again be streamlined. And they agreed on many things. But I think that all, then the Iranians said that, okay, we will do whatever we want to do. And then those sanctions, all sanctions came. With the joint action plan that was decided, in that it was also decided that all nuclear related sanctions against Iran will be lifted, not only by the Americans, but also by the European Union. And that meant that defreezing of tens of billions of dollars from which were frozen in the West. And similarly, the assets, their revenue that they had, the West was supposed to pay to the Iranians, that was confiscated. Now, this is not how you do it. I was reading the UN Charter, and in that, the Article 2(1) of the United Nations Charter says that the organization is based on the principles of sovereign equality of all its members. Now, when you are equal and there is a sovereign equality, then every country has its own right. If the Americans have the right to develop a nuclear weapon, and not only develop, but also use it against old people and women and children and civil population, what a crime. So other nations at least have to go abide by the United Nations Charter. And similarly, in the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter states that nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until Security Council takes certain measures which are necessary to maintain peace. That means that in your reaction, now if, for example, the nuclear development is taking place, there are 7 countries today in the world. That includes Russia, China, America, and then is France and Britain. In addition to that is India and Pakistan. But then there is Israel and North Korea also. Now, there is no check on Israel. If they are developing, and this is a covert development, then how can you stop Iranians because they are their declared enemies? So I think you need to bring in justice in the world, and it has to be across the board. You can't have pick and choose. Cherry picking is not allowed. That will never bring peace. And one of the main objectives of the United Nations was for conflict resolution and maintaining international peace. Then there are conventions, Geneva Conventions and all that. On one hand, whether it is Israel or India, they don't accept UN resolutions. But at the same time, India wants a seat in the Security Council. You don't listen to the Security Council. You don't respect their resolutions on Kashmir, and but you want to become the member, and the West supports them. So this is not how the things go. Iranians even allowed the international atomic agency to IAEA to really come and inspect them. And this contract, this has been signed very recently, I think 21st February this year. And we hope and pray the good sense prevails. And we expect from the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, who is a very visionary person, very wise man, and he believes in peace, and he does not want to victimize other nations. And we expect that the very fact that he said that we'll revisit this, and he said that all other international pacts which were signed in the spirit of the multilateralism, like, for example, climate, Paris Accord on climate, similarly, Trans-Pacific trade the agreement that was done. The American president, ex-president Trump just really ignored all that. And he went for this unilateralism. And that was the worst declaration of that. And that affected everybody because nobody is then safe. So therefore, I, to just sum up, would say that multilateralism we tried to adopt after paying a very heavy price in First World War and Second World War. Let us not repeat those mistakes, and let us live in peace and have that policy of mutual peaceful coexistence. And in that, I think there is a lot of responsibility on the superpowers, and especially the leading superpower, which is United States of America. Militarily, they are the strongest in the world, and even economically so far, they are heading the world. They on their shoulders, there's a great responsibility. We must respect UN Charter. We must respect Geneva Conventions. We must respect UN resolutions, and we must honor the international accords. Because if you don't want to, you only want to pick up things which suit you, and you don't want to do what is not suitable to you. So I think that is the lesson we must carry. And if unilateralism is again adopted by any country, America or any other country, and they take decisions, I think that will bring in disaster in this world, which is already in the grip of a pandemic. And that is, people are really dying. The poverty lines, the people are falling below the poverty line. There is unemployment. Living has become difficult. Poor people have become more poor. Now, under these turmoils, I think we should work for humanity. Spirit of the United Nations Charter is that you should work for socio-economic welfare, for health, for education, for peace, for refugees, for climate and all that. But if you have your strategic considerations more than the human rights and human values and democratic norms, that won't work. So I'm once again grateful that you were so kind to give me this chance to speak to your audience, and inshallah see you soon in Islamabad.
With this, now I will move to our second speaker, Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID from Iran. Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID holds a PhD degree in political science from University of Tennessee. He is a Dean of Faculty of Law and Political Science and Professor of International Relations at University of Tehran. He also served as Assistant Dean in Research Affairs from 1993 to 1995, Dean of Faculty of Law and Political Science from 1995 to 2001, and the Chair of International Relations Department from 2004 to 2007 at University of Tehran. He was a visiting professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at the University of Dover, 2001 to 2003, where he taught courses on Iran-US relations and international politics of Middle East. His area of research includes Iranian contemporary politics, Iran-US relations, and the Middle East. He has also published several articles on these areas of interest. With this, over to you, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam. Good afternoon to all audiences. And first, I will thank Amna and the Institute for Regional Studies to make this webinar possible. And thanks all the audience, especially my dear friend Nazir Hassan. I hope you have my voice because I had some internet issues, problems. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just I wanted to warn, if I was disconnected, I will try to get to the meeting again, because once I was disconnected. I will briefly talk about the background of the Iranian nuclear issue and deal, and then we'll talk about the future of this nuclear deal. First of all, you know, it was in 2003 when for the first time Iranian opposition group which is based in Europe, Mujahideen Khalq organization, revealed Iran's secret nuclear activities. And since after that, for almost 2 decades, foreign policy, domestic policy, economy, and everything has been impacted by the nuclear issue and nuclear talks. And all the time, we are concerned about the Iranian people and the society, the government, that what will happen to this nuclear negotiation, nuclear agreement. And in past 2 decades, you know, there have been a lot of negotiation, either secret negotiation or track to negotiation between Iran and European countries. All these issues. And gradually there have been a lot of sanctions against Iran, which culminated in 2010, 11, and 12, which eventually presidency discussed, and his main campaign agenda became how to resolve. He promised that we would resolve the nuclear issue and also would lift the sanctions through diplomacy, through talks. And when he became the president, which that was his mandate to resolve the Iran's nuclear issue. And for almost 2 years of negotiations, very extensive negotiations in which involved Iran, and eventually, after hours of tiring weeks of negotiations in Europe, which major foreign ministers of major powers were gathered in Europe, eventually 2015, Iran reached a nuclear deal with these countries, which was a big achievement, I believe, for the Iran, for European countries, and for the United States, which it lifted almost all nuclear related sanctions, and which was very good for Iran. On the other hand, also limited Iran's nuclear activity map, which would allow Iran in about 15 years of time to return to regular nuclear research and activities, which they call sunset clause. Realize the national diplomacy agent. If we came to power, he tried to undo all President Obama's achievement, which nuclear deal was one of them. Therefore, he withdrew the United States support from this nuclear deal. And after that, the region witnessed very unstable situation, which almost entered to a very wide war, almost. If you remember, Iran shot down the American very sophisticated drone, and also Saudi oil fields were attacked, some ships were attacked, Iranian prominent Revolutionary Guard commander was assassinated by the United States. American base in Iraq was attacked by Iranian missiles. These all were very destabilizing elements at this very stable region. Therefore, we were very lucky that we didn't get into a wider war. And this shows that how Jcpoa, the nuclear deal, helped prevent the region from catastrophe. But unfortunately, Donald Trump for nuclear deal. Since I have a limited time, I try to explain the important nuclear deal region. Now, in a few time, which I have a future of this nuclear deal. Everyone, I mean, after US withdrawal, the European tried to help some of this benefits which Iran lost because of American sanctions, new sanctions. But they weren't able to. That's the reality. Iran will do something. They didn't do it, and they had to change in the United States. So when Iran almost didn't help from the European started to do some activity which prohibited by this this nuclear deal. For example, between uranium in terms of the or in terms of the oil, which was supposed to in fact is reached 20% uranium enrichment. But and the European will see political change in the Union was elected. He promised during campaign that he joined Jcpoa. It's all significant in the United. So at the age which should put effort. The reason which I'm saying that I believe that so to pass in economic pressure or Iran, so they want to use pressure to get more on and for nuclear activity. Again, or the negotiation in Jcpoa and in region issue to negotiate issues such as Iran like so Iran to the table talk about other some changes, especially the sunset, which is in about from 15 years from now with nuclear.
Sir Reza, your voice is breaking.
Can between Iran and the United States for a couple of
So try to conclude.
months.
Conclude
What we
your news.
expect. I am very optimistic. Include this optimistic. Iran, United States resolve the United, especially Obama in power. They don't want a war to contain Iranian nuclear or the sentences to finish. Can you hear? Okay. Okay.
Sir, try to conclude.
As I have no option.
Sir, your voice is breaking. We cannot hear you properly.
Want to enter a war? If you want to go through to go through Jcpoa. And Iran, it's hardship and problem because one problems for both are have no choice but to join and POs, which in a relationship started it happen. It doesn't happen. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reza, for sharing your valuable views. With this, I will move to our last speaker, Professor Syed Qandil Abbas. Dr. Syed Qandil Abbas did his MSc and PhD in International Relations from University of Tehran, Iran, and presently associated with School of Politics and International Relations, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. He is HEC approved PhD supervisor and has also supervised more than 35 MPhil and 2 PhD theses. He has authored various research articles in national and international journals and contributed chapters in several books, national and international both. He has also presented several research papers and attended workshops on national and international level. Dr. Qandil Abbas is member advisory board of Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa associated with Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. And he frequently participates in current affairs program of national and international media as a political analyst. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Amna. My respectable teacher and mentor, Professor Dr. Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID, Lieutenant General retired Abdul QAYYUM, who is, I think, not present at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. Today's topic of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is very important topic, and international multilateral diplomacy along with Jcpoa is one of the most discussed topics on regional and international levels in recent years. It started right after Iranian Islamic Revolution in 1979. At least at that time, in fact, although Iranian nuclear program was started in 1950s during Mohammad Reza Shah period with the help of United States, but after Islamic Revolution in Iran, United States started to oppose Iranian nuclear program, and they imposed a lot of sanctions on Iran, and especially they tried to stop Iranian nuclear program. And on international levels, they tried to convey that Iran is not a responsible country. On the other hand, Iranian stance was that Iranian nuclear program is only for peaceful purposes. And because of their religious stance, Iranian first and second supreme leader have a religious verdict fatwa that mass destruction weapons are not allowed, and these are in fact haram according to their religious verdict. But United States started to impose a lot of sanctions, and that created hostility, more and more hostility in Iranian and American relationship. On the other hand, America started to isolate Iran, and because of sanctions, they started to create a lot of troubles for Iranian society. So there was the options for American politics, and these options were given by American allies in Europe and even in Middle East and a lot of other regions, that Iran must be included in mainstream regional and international politics. So these options pushed United States, especially during the period of Obama, to have talks and dialogues with Iran. That is why the dialogue was started between Iran and United States with the support of European countries, China and Russia. That was concluded in 2015, and Jcpoa was signed. Despite the historic distrust between Iran and United States, the signing of a landmark nuclear deal in 2015 emerged as a ray of hope for regional and even international peace and security. This deal is supported by global powers and also protected by United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. But unilateral withdrawal of United States and consequently Iran's partial withdrawal from this deal have raised serious concerns for international and regional stakeholders. Such concerns are tremendously influencing world order and regional politics. However, due to the election of Joe Biden as a US president, there is a hope that the deal will be revived. However, the victory of Iranian hardliners in the parliamentary elections of 2020 presented the gloomy scenario for Jcpoa. In the concept note of this webinar, two main questions are raised. Firstly, what will be the future of Jcpoa and multilateral diplomacy? Secondly, how Iran can avoid another US unilateral action in case of Jcpoa failure. About Jcpoa and multilateral diplomacy, it is important to note that multilateral diplomacy is defined as practice of involving some even more than two nations or parties in achieving diplomatic solution to supranational problems. In fact, multilateral diplomacy is the management of international relations by negotiation among more than two states. It can be based on multilateralism or have multilateralism as a goal, and it can be defined as global governance of conflicts and disputes. But it depends upon how multilateralism would be challenged by unilateralism. Jcpoa is a European success story of effective multilateralism, but despite Iranian compliance, Donald Trump's withdrawal from Jcpoa by posing sanctions on Iran is one of the examples of how multilateralism would be challenged by unilateralism. In case of complaints, there is a certain procedure mentioned in the text of deal, especially in paragraph 36, that the procedure which should have been adopted in case of any concerns of any party. No doubt this time the nuclear deal is now facing an uncertain future because of United States steps. Today, in fact, we have United Nations Security Council's resolution on the one hand, and on the other hand, guarantors from Europe, from Russia and China. So based on this, now Jcpoa Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was concluded in 2015, which involved the extensive measures to prevent Iran's uranium enrichment program in exchange of lifting the economic sanctions on Iran. Under this agreement, Iran was bound to keep the uranium enrichment under 3.67% for 15 years. In exchange, the UN, United States, and EU imposed sanctions on Iran would be lifted in the systematic manners. Domestic changes in political landscape of United States and Iran resulted to complication after signing of this deal in 2015, and especially unilateral withdrawal of Trump from this deal has made it more complicated. So presently in Joe Biden's period, there is a ray of hope that the deal will be revived. And recently in last Friday, the process of dialogue has started. And in these dialogues, there is a main problem that on the one hand, United States has presented the solution to resolve the problem step by step and step by step revival of the deal. But Iran is not agreed with this solution. And head of the Iranian delegation to the 18th regular joint session of Jcpoa, Abbas Arakchi, stressed in Vienna on Tuesday that Iran is not interested in step-by-step revival of the nuclear deal at all, and it must be terminated, the sanctions at all at once. So this is the problem now. Two working groups are established in during these dialogues. One group will try to suggest that what America should do, and other group will have suggestions for Iran what they should do. But now the last portion of this discussion is about which are the major options for Iran. On the one hand, if the deal is revived and sanctions are lifted, I think it will be the great opportunity for Iran to improve its economy in post-sanctions period. But in case deal is not revived, I think Iran has already thought about alternative, and Iran has signed strategic deal with China. That is a deal of investment of more than $400 billion in Iran. That is a huge amount, and that can support Iranian economy. If Iran was not having support by European countries and a deal was not revived, I think China will support Iran, and Iran will support China, and that will create another bloc in the region. On the other hand, if Iran is continuing its nuclear program, definitely till this time, Iran claimed that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, but keeping in view threats coming from Israel and Israel's relations with Iran's neighboring country, UAE, Bahrain, and other countries, Iran will definitely opt for nuclear program as a deterrence in front of Israeli threat and other American allies in the region. And I think that will be very destabilizing for this region. And in the end, I want to just mention that Pakistan is supporting Iranian nuclear program because Iran claimed that it is a peaceful purposes. And if Pakistan is also facing pressure from other countries, so Pakistan is also adopted good relations with China, and we have started CPEC in Pakistan as an alternative. We have very good relations with Russia, and last day Russian foreign minister started his visit to Pakistan. So these signs are signs of emergence of new bloc in the region that may include Pakistan, China, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. So I think the wise and rational decision for United Nations, US, and especially European countries is the revival of the deal and preventing the ways to improve Iranian, to convert Iranian program into the military grade nuclear program. So ultimately, I think everybody needs security and stability in this region, and that is only possible in case of revival of this nuclear deal. I thank you very much, and especially I thank Dr. TAKHSHID, who is my teacher and mentor, and I thank you all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable views. This has really given us a chance to understand the issue from multiple dimensions. Now I hand over the floor to Mr. Imran Sardar for question answer session and concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amna. Before we proceed to the question answer session, I would request Professor Samina Yasmin to share her thoughts. Over to you, Samina Yasmin.
Thank you very much, Sardar. I know it's a short notice, but I just thought I'll make a few observations, which don't really add more than what's already been said. But I was thinking, if the deal is not revived in its original form, what is the threat to regional stability and global stability? I think I'm glad that Dr. QANDIL talked about Abraham Accords without mentioning them by name. But the reality is that we have to see this whole scenario, this whole deal within the larger regional scenario. That because Israel has signed deals with some of the countries in the region. Sorry, you'll have to excuse this sound at the back. So basically what we have come to the situation is that, let's say the deal is not revived. What are the dangers? I think within Iran, it would further strengthen the position of the radical elements. At the same time, it's going to give justification for those who are willing to compromise on the Palestinian issue and establish closer relations with Israel. Now, at one level, I think we have to accept the reality of Israel, but if that happens, then I think there's a possibility, as again, Dr. QANDIL was saying, the regional blocs would be formed. Now, regional blocs under lots of conditions can be stabilizing, but under present condition, I think they'll be destabilizing, because then we will have two sides, one with nuclear capacity really enjoyed by Israel, and the other one with Iran with having its capacity, but willing to increase it. I think the long-term threat for that would be great. So we really need to find a solution to that. Other than that, what does it involve for America? I think it increases the costs for American foreign policy, because we shouldn't look at it just as the Iranian issue or the regional issue. If the agreement is not revived, it also has a cost for America in terms of its reliability as a country that engages in agreements. If it can pull out of an agreement at such a short notice and then not revive it, basically creates confidence of reliability. And I think for America as a superpower, it's not something that it should entertain. So for those reasons, I really do hope that the agreement is revived. And I also know that it's not going to be that easy, and both the sides, like what happened between US and China, are going to flex their muscles and only later on agree at some stage, hopefully with some agreement along the lines that we had before. I hope that adds something, but thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Dr. Samina Yasmin, for your valuable inputs on this burning issue. And I agree that this would fan the, if negotiations fail, it would really strengthen Iran's radical position in not only in the Middle East, but also it has its impact on the South Asian region as well. Before we formally proceed towards the question answer session, I just want to ask a very simple and small question from Dr. Syed QANDIL Abbas. Do you think that if nothing changes, do you think that this deadlock would ultimately lead to a war between the United States and Iran, since United States is committed never to allow the Iran to get nuclear weapons? What's your take on it, Dr. Syed QANDIL Abbas?
I believe Iran is not having intention to produce nuclear weapon until this time, based on religious verdict. Iran is.
Sir, please unmute yourself. You're not audible.
Nuclear weapon that is prohibited in Iran. But my only concern is in case of failure of deal, if Iran is feeling threats from Israel or any other American ally in the region, so definitely some cases, sometimes some haram or forbidden things will become halal or allowed in Islamic verdicts. So that can push Iran towards production of military grade nuclear weapon, and that will seriously threaten regional and international security.
Thank you very much. Now I formally proceed to the question answer session. The floor is open for questions. I can see multiple questions are in the chat box, but I would request if somebody wants to ask questions here. There is also a hand raise option in the chat box. And please introduce yourself a little bit and specify the speaker whom you want to ask. Please, if anybody wants to ask a question, it's up to, the floor is open.
Hello, can I ask?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Dr. Meher Taj Roghani. I'm senator from Pakistan. My question is that if the UN resolution is not honored by developing countries, I mean, when the resolutions are from the developing countries, then what is the answer? Like, one gets frustrated. I'm talking about Azad Kashmir resolution. I mean, like, what should we do then? From any sort of, any speaker.
Okay. So Dr. Syed Kadil, would you please want to respond to this question?
Actually, we make it clear that about nuclear deal at this time, we don't have any discussion in United Nations. That is out of United Nations. Although there is a resolution from United Nations Security Council 2231, that is just guaranteeing and covering this deal. But the major dialogue is between America, European countries, Russia, China, and Iran. So that is out of the scope of United Nations. And that is why Iran wanted, on the one hand, guarantee from United Nations Security Council, and on the other hand, Iran demanded for international guarantors. And today, when for revival of this deal, when dialogue started in Vienna, Austria, Iran refused to sit with the Americans, and they said that the whole deal must be revived first. All the sanctions against Iran must be lifted, and then they will be able to discuss other things. So I think there is no involvement of United Nations at this point of time.
Thank you. Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID, would you like to respond to this question?
Okay, can you hear me now? Because I had internet issues. Sorry if my remarks was interrupted, I think. Do you have my voice now?
You're audible.
Okay. My friend QANDIL Abbas explained very well the issue, and what I want to also explain that this deal is outside the UN Security Council resolution. And in terms of violating, I mean, the agreement and withdrawal of Trump from this deal, I think that's an exception in the norm of statehood in this times. You know, we rarely have had a national leader in so-called democratic countries to withdraw from a deal which their, presidents before them had signed and agreed to. Therefore, I believe that if we reach in an agreement, again, it's very likely that it would be held by next national leaders, and that's what I hope so. That has been the norm of world politics in and international relations in past 60, 70 years or so.
Thank you very much. I can see hand raised. Heather, I can see Heather wants to ask a question. Over to you, Heather. Are you listening? You have just raised your hand for a question. I think we move towards.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me, please?
You're audible.
Yeah. My name is Adil and I'm a student of International Relations. I have one question from Mr. Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID from Iran. I want to ask that what does he think that the missile program of Iran and its nuclear and its proxies, but will they be added in the coming JCPO or JCPO plus? This is my first question, and the second is that what if the hardliners will come to power and JCPO will not revive within before June 2021, before the presidential election? What will be the future and how will the hardliners react to the JCPO? Yes,
do you want me to answer now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. First, in your first question, I mean, the European and the United States many times, even during the nuclear deal negotiations, they insisted to include other issues in the nuclear talks. But Iran never agreed to that. Iran said that we are solely ready to talk solely about the nuclear issues. And they did that and they achieved a relatively good deal. Now, the reason which I explained some in my remarks, maybe I was interrupted by my internet failure. What I said that right now the Europeans are trying to again include other issues to the nuclear deal when they want to talk about reviving the JCPOA again. And I believe that Iran wouldn't agree at all at this point. They might agree to talk after the revival of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. If it's revived and everything returned to normal, then after that, Iran might consider talking on other issues such as the regional issues and Iran's support of, for example, Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so forth. And your second question about the coming election in Iran, since the parliament was, became very one-sided toward the principalist, and we can say maybe some hardline extremist, principalists also become more powerful in this parliament. And so far they have tried to derail this nuclear deal. But what I believe that even if the hardliners or the principalists, hardline principalists take over the presidency, the nuclear deal and nuclear issue is a national issue, and it has the blessing of the supreme leader. It's not that it is done without the consent of the supreme leader. And if you are engaging negotiation, again, has the blessing of the supreme leader. Therefore, I believe that right now, the Iranians, the politicians, the supreme leaders see that it is in Iran's benefit to join the original version of the Jcpoa. Therefore, I doubt that if the next Iranian president became a hardline principalist, we will withdraw or we will lose the nuclear deal, Jcpoa. I think it will continue if the United States enter to the Jcpoa based on the original version, no any revision or any change.
Thank you. I agree with Mohammad Reza, as you said, that since it's a national issue, and whoever comes in power in Iran would have to deal on the principles. So this is where the United States is also thinking that this kind of a gesture is important in resolving the issue. So I can see Aisha Zahid from the participants wants to ask a question. Over to you, Aisha Zahid.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Aisha. I'm visiting faculty of media studies in one of the universities here in Islamabad. I'm also working as a communication manager in research firm. My question, because I'm not very much from the diplomatic side, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but I have it in my mind after this session. So please allow me to ask these 2 to 3 questions. Okay, my first question is about the future and weightage of Jcpoa, because you're talking about the strategic deal of Iran signed with China, which will of course open a lot of gateways for its economic betterment. And then we're talking about the Iranian hardcores here in Iranian parliament. So from which side now Jcpoa is facing more threat? Because now we have Joe Biden, who has a very lighter stance as compared to Trump. My first question. And what is the weightage of Jcpoa for Iran at this very moment when it has an alternative option, especially for its economic gateways? Okay, my second question is about the discussion when General QAYYUM, I guess, talked about Israel versus Iran's nuclear plan. So he said that if we're not talking about Israel's nuclear power, we should not be talking about Iran's. Israel, on the other side, says that it is developing its nuclear power for defensive purposes. So first, it's like egg or the chicken, right? So you have to act like you have to take one step, and that one step should come from Iran's side. This is my second question. My third is probably not a question, just a little addition to what was said by General QAYYUM on India, UN, and the entire Kashmir issue. I believe every time we're talking about this, we are pointing out our finger at India, that India is not listening to UN. Do you think, as experts on strategic issues, that it is not India who is wrong over here, rather UN? We have seen UN talking about what's or not in Myanmar's case. It's a coup in the country by its own army, and look at the role UN is about to play. But have we ever seen UN talking about India in the way it is talking about Myanmar? So isn't it UN, rather India, who is not taking the stance that is required? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You did not specify that whom you want to ask a question. So
anyone.
Anyone.
Yeah.
So I will directly go to the Dr. Syed QANDIL Abbas to respond to the question. It's all about the question is all about the threat and the JCO, the strength and weakness of the JCPO. So what's your take on it?
Okay. Thank you very much. This is very relevant question. Actually, the weightage of Jcpoa for Iran is presently not very high because before the Iran's deal with China, that is more than 400 billion deal with China. Before that, the weightage of Jcpoa was very high for Iran because Iranian economy was totally depending upon lifting of sanctions imposed by America on Iran during last 40 years. But now Iran found another way and alternative, that is China, and even Iran is very getting closer to Russia, and Iran is also extending its influence in the region. That is very useful for China and Russia and the Middle East. So presently the situation is very flexible for America to re-engage Iran and to revive the deal. But I think in 2020 parliament election in Iran, hardliners came into majority in Iran. And that has, in fact, a sign of expected success of hardliners president in Iranian presidential election in May or June, I think. So in case of hardliner success in presidential election, the whole scenario will become very difficult for Americans as well as for Europeans to come to engage Iran in regional and international issues, because it is a strong belief in Iran that if they want to get into the regional and international politics, they must respect international law, they must respect their deals, they must respect their agreements. So if they are not respecting Jcpoa, then nobody will respect their agreements and deals on regional and international levels. I think presently the value of this deal is very important for America and Europe and others, and not for Iran, because Iran has found alternatives.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID. Would you like to respond to this question raised by Aisha?
Okay, I believe that maybe I'm optimistic, but I think that Iran and the West will have resolved their differences and will join this Jcpoa based on the original content of that. And as I mentioned in my talk remarks, if they didn't hear, my argument is that for the United States and the European countries, there are two options. One is war, and one is having control over Iran's nuclear activity through diplomacy. And Jcpoa is that they are able to have any sort of inspection of Iranian nuclear plant and sites. Therefore, they can observe if Iran does any irregular things at their nuclear sites. On the other hand, for Iran is the best option to revive its economy. It's true that we have signed a 25 years memorandum with China, and Iran has other options. And I believe that no way Iran would collapse under these sanctions, but there would be hardship on the people. There would be hardship on the government to manage to the economy. Therefore, it's very much in Iran beneficial to have good relationship with the Russian, with China, and also with the West and the United States in terms of reviving its economy in order to improve its economy. Therefore, if you look at this, both sides would benefit from joining this Jcpoa, and I believe that through negotiations they would find a roadmap to get to that point that they were before.
Thank you very much. About Israel, I want to ask a question that if JCPOs fails, what would be the response from the Israeli, how it will going to impact the Israel's relations with Iran, and how it is going to impact the overall situation in the Middle East if nothing changes and both sides back on the deadlock. So what do you think?
Okay, in regard to the Israel factor, you know, we have had, I think, decades of speculation that Israel would attack Iran's nuclear sites or military sites and so forth. And if you have followed the news in regard to Israel and Iran, even in every UN Security Council in past 3-4 years, Netanyahu went there and showed drawing that Iran is ready, very close to assembling nuclear weapon and so forth. But I am not that much in that direction, that if the nuclear deal failed, Israel would consider attacking Iran, say, nuclear sites. A possibility. It's a long-term possibility, but nothing, I mean, which would happen in the immediate future, because Israeli attack has a lot of consequences for the region, which I believe even the United States wouldn't like to enter in that situation, which see the whole Persian Gulf region and the Middle East engulfed in a wide war of fighting between Iran, Israel, and for sure Iran would try to involve other countries in such a war. Therefore, I'm not very optimistic in regard to a war if Iran fails to adhere to JCPOA.
Thank you, Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID. There is another question from Heather. He wants to ask that will Iran agree to partial relief? This question is in the chat panel. I'm just over to you, Professor Mohammad Reza.
Okay, it's Iranian government and the state's announcement so far has been that the United States should join the JCPOA as it withdrew from that, and then Iran would join the nuclear deal. But I think it's possible that through this negotiation, which is happening right now in Vienna, and they said that for the next 10 days at least, there would be some negotiation between two sides in order to find a roadmap to enter the JCPOA. Based on that, it's very much possible that, for example, the United States lift some sanctions and Iran also, for example, decrease its uranium enrichment grade, for example. It's very possible, but I think right now Iran's stand is that we want the full implementation of JCPOA by the United States before we enter the deal. This is the official line of policy.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to ask a question from Dr. Syed Kandil Abbas. One of the participants, Adnan Khan, has asked, how do you see the Biden policy on Iran, as Trump was very strict? So over to you, Dr. Kandil.
I am not very pessimistic and not very optimistic about Biden's policy towards Iran, because there are a lot of hopes about Biden's policy towards Iran and Middle East. But I believe that this policy will not be same like the period of Obama, and it will not be same like the period of Trump. There are new dimensions and there are new factors involved in this policy, because today there are demands from Arabian countries, especially Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel, and they are demanding that we must be part of this deal because this deal is belonging to this region. That is opposed by Iran, and I don't think America or European will accept this, because Joe Biden is trying to come up with new suggestions. The main problem for regional countries is Iran's nuclear, not only nuclear program, but its missile program. But for missile program and nuclear program, the general suggestion from Iranian side is nuclear weapon free zone in the Middle East. Iran believe that there must be a broader agreement in the Middle East, and none of the Middle Eastern countries should be allowed to produce nuclear weapon, including Israel. So that is a very viable suggestion. If Joe Biden can work on this, that can bring peace and stability in this region.
Thank you very much. I must say that we must start from the question and answer session, because it was really interesting and lively. Instead of going direct to the speeches, we would have to start it from the question answer session. It was really interesting. Now, with this, I would like to conclude that conclude, and thanks to the participants. The panelists have raised some important points in today's discussion. Lieutenant General retired ABDUL rightly said that America's unilateralism have brought miseries to the world, and if the history repeats, it would further complicate Iran's position in the Middle East, and also impact Iran's relations with the South Asian states, including Pakistan. So Professor Mohammad Reza TAKHSHID provided a comprehensive background to the Jcpoa and overall Iran's nuclear issue. He still thinks that the Jcpoa has a critical role, and it has helped prevent Iran from enrichment. So thirdly, Dr. Syed Kandil Abbas enlightened us with what the Jcpoa is all about. There is still a deadlock where the United States has suggested an incremental approach, which Iran has refused. Having said, there is a consensus, at least, that Jcpoa is the only workable option to narrow the bridge between the United States and Iran. In the end, I would say that the recent meetings of the remaining signatories of Jcpoa with Iran is at least going to establish some kinds of specifications of the problem to work out. For instance, what kinds of sanctions that United States, that Washington can lift, and what obligations Iran can meet. So this sequencing the United States and Iranian compliance is indeed a necessary step to move forward. Since United States is gearing up to have peace deal in Afghanistan, the growing rapprochement between Iran and the United States will have a positive impact on it. With this, I thank you all the panelists, and I must say that we will continue our discussion in the follow-up webinar on the Jcpoa. With this, over to you, Amna Nisar Abbasi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much all for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening.